Mr. President, up here! I voted for you! Wait a minute. That guy on the grassy knoll's got a gun. He's gonna shoot the president. Holy smokes, I've got to do something. All right, Lee, time to become an American hero.
Darkmyths.org and Neopolis Media Group proudly present to you the Lone Gunman Podcast, featuring your host, Rob Clark, where research comes to shine and myths come to die. Stay tuned. Be right there.
The Select Committee on Assassinations will at this time come to order.
The most damaging sealed documents of the House Select Committee on Assassinations accuse high-ranking officials of the Central Intelligence Agency of lying to the people of the United States about Lee Harvey Oswald. House investigators believe this man, David Atlee Phillips, met with Oswald 2 months before the assassination. Phillips was the CIA's chief of Western Hemisphere operations and was in charge, among other things, of plots against Fidel Castro. According to the secret reports, Antonio Viciana, a leader of anti-Castro Cubans directed by the CIA, saw Oswald talking to a senior CIA agent he knew by the cover name Maurice Bishop. Viciana provided enough information for House investigators to compile this sketch of the agent who met Oswald. Could it have been Phillips? Investigators believe it was. Phillips denied under oath that he knew Oswald, but House investigators did not believe him and wanted him charged with perjury. The government declined to prosecute, leaving investigators furious. The director of the CIA in 1963 was John McCone. He caused a sensation among committee staffers when he admitted there was an agent using the cover name Bishop. But a secret memo reveals he was allowed to reverse his testimony. A CIA lawyer wrote the committee, "I should inform you that he had been in error." In summary, Mr. McCone withdraws his statements on this point. The man who fingered Maurice Bishop, Antonio Viciana, was shot in the head soon after testifying, but survived. Frightened, he will no longer talk about the case, but we caught up with him in Florida.
They wounded me in the head. They're trying to kill me.
You know why? Why were they?
I don't know, perhaps the FBI knows. The FBI knows.
Did they tell you?
No. Actually.
David Atlee Phillips died of cancer in 1988. Investigators believe Phillips was angry at JFK for botching the Cuban Bay of Pigs operation.
Did you kill the president?
The second explosive revelation in the sealed documents also links the CIA directly to Oswald. While living in Dallas, Oswald was befriended by Russian-born George de Mohrenschildt. Investigators determined he was a contract agent for the CIA in Central America and the Caribbean. In 1977, moments before he was to be interviewed by House investigators, de Mohrenschildt blew his brains out with a 20-gauge shotgun. House investigators believe he was a crucial link between the CIA and Lee Harvey Oswald.
There is no question that the sealed JFK files are extremely embarrassing for the CIA. House investigators have told Inside Edition that the agency did not fully cooperate in their investigation and that the CIA had final say in the report that the House Assassinations Committee made public. Thus, the public report makes no mention of the CIA's links with Lee Harvey Oswald. But the secret documents are another story.
One interesting sidelight, the movie JFK was partially based on Jim Garrison's investigation in New Orleans. Well, House investigators uncovered evidence that the CIA planted 9 agents inside the Garrison investigation to feed him false information and to report back to Langley on what Garrison was finding out.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. This is episode number 135 of the Lone Gunman Podcast, and I'm your host, Rob Clark. And today, the author of Two Princes and a King and proprietor of the Neapolis Media Group, Mr. Carmine Savastano, joins the show. How you doing, Carmine?
I'm good. How are you doing, Rob?
Doing good, buddy. Been a couple weeks off, just chilling, enjoying the holidays, and working my ass off. How was your holidays?
Hectic, but, pretty good. Yeah,
That's
I think
good.
Everybody's usually pretty busy over the holidays, that and people getting sick. What are you going to do?
Oh, I know. I don't know how it is up there, but the weather down here is crazy, man.
Yeah.
It was at in the teens at the beginning of the week, and it was like 50 and 60 on Wednesday and Thursday, and now it's back down in the 30s.
Yeah, we saw it get to a balmy 40 up here for a little while.
Oh, man.
Before it got back down to the single digits where it's supposed to be.
40 up in the mitten. Not bad, not bad. So look, we're going to be talking about a guy today that, of course, it's going to be controversial. I mean, when you and me get together, it always turns controversial. Because a lot of people in the research community, have a fondness for this guy. They like this guy. They believe this guy for some reason, even though he is not a good person in my opinion. But there's always been something about his story that's bothered me, and I'm sure it's bothered you. That's why we're looking into it today. And that man is Antonio Veciana, and we're going to be diving into his story here today and his ties with Alpha 66, and of course the investigation the House Select Committee did, in Gate and Fonzie, and what they found, and what the documents tell us. So, Carmine, where do you want to start, my friend?
Well, I wanted to start somewhere around, just basically give everybody a basic idea of some of Veciana's claims and what exactly happened. And I do want to agree with you that there are a lot of people who want to believe in him, and I think one of the things that makes him appealing to people is that he does have actual ties to Cuban exile groups. He does have actual ties to, violent revolutionaries. So we can actually place him in some of the more elaborate, unfounded myths like, your JVB or your James Files, stuff like that. Doesn't have a bunch of evidence. So it's basically all mythology, and then they try to fill it in with little incidental evidence. With Veciana, you can actually get some substantive evidence that he at least was in the right place at the right time. He at least was, involved with people who could have undertaken a conspiracy. So I think that's what makes him a little bit more believable than the average myth. But the problem is when you start to get into the specifics, his tale doesn't really hold up, in my opinion. And we have to realize, too, that Fonzie and the HSCA were working with an incomplete set of evidence. That we have more evidence after the releases of the 90s, and hopefully after some releases happen this year, than they had. And even what they had wasn't complete.
Right.
It's just what the agency and the FBI allowed them to get.
Yeah. Now, for folks out there who don't know who we're talking about, okay, it's Antonio Veciana. He was the leader of Alpha 66, which was an anti-Castro Cuban revolutionary group, what we call terrorists today. A little more accurately, and he had an interesting tale to tell the HSCA, and of course, when you get shot in the head, it tends to lend a little bit more credence to your story.
Yeah, that too. I think also, people sympathize with that, but the point is that lots of exiles were killed in all manner of gruesome ways, and it had nothing to do with any connection to the Kennedy assassination. They had tried to attack and kill people, including the leader of Cuba, so that made a lot of other people who were loyal to him upset.
Oh, of course. And, when he told the tale of I've talked about it here on this show for many, many, many times. The name Bishop comes up over and over and over again in many different places, whether it's regarding a person, whether it's regarding, a bishop in a fake church, or, a colonel, or, military people, mystical, maybe mythical CIA character cover names, things of this nature. And, tell everybody real quick, just what Veciana had to say about Lee Harvey Oswald.
Okay. Well, yeah. Basically, I think the thing that brought it into the modern age, as far as the conspiracy community goes, is on November 22nd, 2013, Veciana, who was the former leader of the anti-Castro exile group Alpha 66, he sent a letter that was offered to researchers publicly later, and he had sent it to Marie Fonzi, who was the widow of Gaten Fonzi, who was an investigator that supported Veciana's claims. In the letter, he said that he prior saw CIA officer David Atlee Phillips, and he asserted that Phillips used the name Maurice Bishop at a meeting where Lee Harvey Oswald was present for a time as well. So basically, he says he saw the two of them together in Dallas. And where the story starts to have trouble is he never really gives a specific date. Like, he doesn't give a definite day of the week, doesn't give a definite date, and doesn't even give a definite month. He said it was near the end, fall-ish of 63. So it could be August, it could be September, it could be October.
Yeah, I always thought it was late August or early September.
Those are the two most quoted. Yeah. But yeah, it varies between some of the accounts.
Yep, and the story is interesting because if it's true, of course, then we have Lee Harvey Oswald meeting with David Atlee Phillips of the CIA, which would be a huge bombshell if true.
Mm-hmm. And I think that those are the ones we have to be most careful with.
Oh yeah,
something that ties up everything nicely.
Yeah.
Is usually not going to be the answer that we're seeking, and there's got to be a problem with it, because rarely in this case does anything get tied up nicely. It's spread over a bunch of different, if not only agencies, but over different people's actions that can morph and transform over time.
Yeah, because, we also should tell everybody, too, that, he didn't publicly admit who he thought or who he suspected Morris Bishop or whatever you want to call him was. He never really admitted it to Fonzie. Fonzie had his suspicions that Veciana vaguely, was like, well, I'm not going to say yes or no, but maybe, and I think it was a couple of years ago, like you say, about the letter to Gaten Fonzie's widow, where he finally admitted that, yes, Maurice Bishop was David Atlee Phillips. It wasn't. He didn't actually come out and say that until a couple of years ago. It's just been suspected over the past 40 years or whatever.
Yeah, and I think we should also factor in too that at that point David Atlee Phillips was dead, so he couldn't sue Veciana.
That's true too.
And Gaten Fonzie was gone, so Veciana was acting almost as if trying to affirm Fonzie's, contentions after his death. So people are going to be sympathetic to that as well, because a lot of people liked Fonzie. He worked hard for the committee and tried to get all the information he possibly could.
Yeah, and his book, The Last Investigation is one of the best out there, although there is a lot of reliance on this Veciana story in that book, which is, of course, a problem because, once again, as you know, people that listen to the show, when you have a great, fantastic story and no evidence to back it up except just what you're saying, there's a problem.
Yeah, definitely.
As with so many other people.
Well, yeah, and I think upon further examination, we can see some of the serious problems that become apparent with the story. The first one I would say that's worth mentioning, and it'll be the first document that I sent, and it's from before the House Select Committee really got into the nuts and bolts of Veciana's story and trying to corroborate it. And this was during the Schweiker, Senator Richard Schweiker, who was on the Schweiker Committee, who was investigating some of these things, sent a document reviewing the matter to House Select Committee on Assassinations Counsel Richard Sprague. And in the document, the senator says, now this is Veciana, this would be one of his earliest versions of what he made the assertions earlier, but this would be down in the official record what he is basically claiming to Senator Schweiker. So he's basically passing this on to the HSCA before Fonzie got involved. So what he says is in 1961, Viciana worked as a CPA, certified public accountant, in Havana, a Havana bank owned by Julio Lobo. That year, he was contacted by an American who identified himself as Bishop. His first name is uncertain, maybe Morris, John, or Jim.
Now, that narrows it down a little bit. Morris, John, or Jim.
Yeah, those are vastly different names.
Yeah. And where do you get Maurice from?
Well, I think Maurice might be a permutation of Morris.
Yeah.
Which is just another change.
Yeah.
You know, if you can't, first of all, you need to have one name. One name consistently through all the versions of the story. And we don't have that. We have, in the earliest versions, 3 versions of the name, and none of them are the current version of the name, which is Maurice. Which I could understand if someone, you know, I've had it said to me that, well, it's possible that, you know, because of Viciana's accent, someone might have misunderstood Morris to be Maurice, or someone might have thought Maurice was Morris, and that's fine. But what about John or Jim?
Yeah, that's a lot different there. For sure. Yeah. Like I said, there's so many bishops attached to this case, it gets confusing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, because you got, Colonel William Bishop, who some suspect have ties to the assassination, and, you know, you got David Ferry and all these cats down there in New Orleans with being bishops this and bishop that, and, you know.
Yeah, and I think it become amalgamated over time sometimes.
Yeah.
And then we're going to go through some of them to get in some of the other documents, but I found through some of the investigations the CIA did internally almost 15 different bishops. Now, there were people at the last bishop, there were people, but they never found Maurice Bishop with the physical description given to them by Viciana.
Yeah, which they made a sketch from, and you know, it does kind of look like David Atlee Phillips, but it also really looks like Fred Lee Christmas if you put them side by side.
Yeah, you can definitely get other people to be that person as well. So I think that was an unfortunate thing that the committee relied upon. That wasn't really solid.
Yeah, and if you go digging back to the Garrison trial and the grand jury testimony of Fred Crispin, he was like, he told people, people like to call me Bishop, Bishop this and Bishop that, but he was alluding to the fact that I think that Thomas Beckham had given him fake credentials as a bishop or something of this nature. But anyway, it gets confusing. But we're going to stick to the realm of David Atlee Phillips as this mysterious bishop for what we're really talking about here today.
Yeah. Well, and I have a surprise as far as people who are accused for you later.
I love surprises.
So I'd say, it's a major issue that the very name used to describe the unknown person he would state as David Atlee Phillips has 3 distinctly different names. And none of them is the current Maurice Bishop. Now, that could have been a mistranslation or a miscommunication at some point, but Viciana in the official documents stated Morris, Morris, not Maurice.
Yeah.
And in earlier news reports, we can see that too. So it wasn't until later interviews the name changes to Maurice Bishop consistently.
All right, let me ask you a question real quick. What was David Atlee Phillips' official title with the CIA? He was head of what?
In 63, I know that he was the head of the covert action and foreign intelligence for the Mexico City station.
Okay, so what the hell would the head of the foreign intelligence of the Western Hemisphere be doing?
Yeah, in Dallas.
Talking in public in Dallas to the leader of this terrorist organization. I mean, wouldn't you would think that somebody else lower down the rung a little bit would be handling things, not
and you would
Phillips
directly. Somebody closer too. And
yeah. I mean, because people don't understand that even though Dallas is, of course, down south and Mexico is right underneath Texas, it's still like 3,000 miles to Mexico City from Dallas, which is a hike. That's like going from D.C. to California or more. So,
Well, that's the problem the story runs into later on too, is when we start to assess Phillips's record, because they kept track of all of the and they kept track of the expenditures. So, and Viciana at one point claims that he met with Bishop 100 times. Yet there's no markings of it they didn't purge all of Phillips. They had to keep track of where he was. They had to keep track of what they were paying him. They had to know where he was at most of the time. So when you start to look, there's problems there too. Phillips was elsewhere in places where Viciana said Bishop was.
Right.
So I'd say that, so we've gone over the names. The next few documents, I think, highlight some of the other problems as well, because the first of these pieces of evidence is Viciana does not claim to have been first approached by Bishop in 1961 like he did with the Schweiker Committee, but he claimed to have been approached by Bishop in 1960. So that's another detail that isn't consistent.
Oh, imagine that.
Well, and Viciana meets up, he's largely the one initiating. The CIA does use him, and they use his, part of his group multiple times, but they never employ him directly as an employee, and they never involve him in any of their assassination plots. What Viciana doesn't understand, later on he claims that, this was part of an assassination plot to kill the president, is they already had ongoing assassination plots trying to take out Castro. They already had people who were trained. Viciana is a banker. He was used for sabotage, for minor things. They were never going to use Viciana as some commando leader for an intricate assassination, or let him be anywhere near people who weren't doing that.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense.
So we've got that, and this would be the, going on to the third document. In this one, Viciana says that Bishop... So in this one, Viciana says that Bishop represented the CIA and private interests that sought him out specifically.
Right. Now, it's understandable that, the CIA would be, or elements of the CIA would be talking to Viciana, maybe even paying him to do things, or...
Mm-hmm. Oh, and they did, yeah. Eventually, we can legitimize that at certain times they did use him for sabotage purposes.
Exactly. Okay. That part I can see being legitimate, so yeah.
Yeah, it's just when he tries to make himself more important and, central to an assassination. And in this, in his story, the key, basically, to unlocking that connection between Oswald and the CIA.
Yeah, which is a huge, huge, huge leap. Yeah.
And we need to remember too that in this current document, the agency states that December 9th, 1960, Viciana himself approached the agency station in Havana. So, Fernandez Yarzabal, another anti-Castro company planned to kill Castro. Viciana claimed that he had a carefully thought-out plot to wipe out the Prime Minister and his top associates. Therefore, Viciana physically approached the CIA with Yarzabal, who actually was a former agency asset. So Viciana at the meeting tried to claim that the chief of Havana Station, that he was involved in the same agency activities that his companion was. But an internal check done by the CIA station said that it was negative, supporting no such association. So he was already trying to connect himself to the CIA even in the first meeting with them.
Now, let me ask you a question. So, we can't pinpoint the date of this thing, but was Oswald even in Dallas that early?
Well, that's the problem too. We might as well talk about it now. The problem is that Oswald was in New Orleans.
Right. And
Phillips was elsewhere as well. We'll get into that with the document in August.
I know
Phillips was elsewhere in September too.
Yeah. Yeah, I know there's some spots in Oswald's timeline where, he can't be accounted for, but, it's I mean, I'm sure David Perry could have hopped in his plane and flew into Texas real quick, for a meeting.
Well, yeah, and the problem is, too, is that he left from New Orleans to Mexico City, so he can't be there in September either.
Right. Yeah. So there's that.
Yeah, unless Oswald had a private jet. That may
He had a private pilot, I mean, come on. According to Judith Baker.
Exactly. I think that, those are the timing is definitely a problem with the story. And because it was left so general, and unfortunately he picked a general area where it's hard for any of those people to be where he said they were.
Didn't she wrap this story into her little book as well? Mm-hmm. That's what I thought, that she legitimized this whole meeting with Phillips in her book.
Oh yeah. Exactly. That's always a good test. If Judith Baker is saying it's true, it's probably not.
Right. And then I'm sure even if there was a remote possibility that Phillips was meeting with Oswald, that there's no way in hell that he would have told Oswald his name, his real name.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just ridiculous, dude.
Yeah. So apparently, Viciana told the CIA people he was meeting with that his plot required official documents to secure the escape of 4 snipers and their family from Cuba. And the agency representative gave Viciana no encouragement whatsoever. Viciana had also prior approached another official who states he offered a similar wild-eyed proposal. So I think it's unlikely the CIA would utilize a bank manager for clandestine operations.
Probably so.
Yeah, and they didn't seem to really take him that seriously in the first meeting, at least.
Right. Doesn't sound like it.
Yeah. So the next document. This is a second meeting, or I'm sorry. This is in 1961, and it's a memo on Alpha 66 and Viciana's activities. So in 61, despite the assurances of some agency officers to investigators, Antonio Viciana, because the agency said that they only had the 3 meetings with Viciana, which isn't true. They had those 3 meetings, and Viciana tried to approach them. But they also had off-the-books meetings where they used him a few times before and after the assassination. But during the assassination, we'll come to learn that Alpha 66 and Viciana were in no position to have anything to do with the agency. So in 61, they said that the CIA never told the agency investigators that they had met with him. But Antonio Viciana did have a working relationship with the CIA at that time, but not the one he claimed later. In October 7, 1961, Viciana entered the U.S. at Key West and received $100 monthly in refugee assistance. By December 29th, the CIA's Miami station, JM Wave, had asked for provisional operational approval for Viciana. His assignment did not include Alpha 66, nor had anything to do with the agency Castro plots. Instead, the evidence supports that Viciana was one of multiple people assigned to aid the Movimiento Revolucionario del Pueblo, the MRP, and other anti-Castro groups supported by the CIA that he used to represent in Havana. So this demonstrates an additional connection to the CIA claimed by Viciana that was off the books. But it doesn't connect him to any agency Castro plot, and it doesn't support any of his assertions regarding Bishop.
Yeah.
So I think that's believable. It's believable that he had connections with them, and he did have off-the-books connections with them that they didn't admit to investigators, but not the ones he's claiming. So,
right.
Exactly, which is the problem.
Yeah.
So, additionally, in July of 62, at an Alpha 66 meeting in Puerto Rico, Viciana demanded funds from potential sponsors and offered threats to those who would fund Alpha 66 operations.
Terrorist threats. Imagine that.
He stated at the meeting that they undertake an action program outside of U.S. control. In this connection, the group was in contact with a person named Joe, but the group was not going to confide in CIA and were taking precaution of avoiding CIA penetration. So, first of all, this report's existence offers the futility of Alpha 66 attempts to prevent the agency from monitoring activities. You know, they still had someone there that was informing for them against them. So, in November of 62, after that episode, the agency received a report that Alpha 66 officer Dr. Ramon Perez Dapple and Dr. Jose Luis Gonzalez, the man he assisted, were both Castro-Cuban infiltrators who allegedly served Cuban intelligence. Rob?
I'm here, sir.
Okay. Sorry, just checking. So
I was muted. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. So Viciana's threats and his attempts to shut out agency surveillance and his group's alleged penetration by Cuban intelligence, I think, rendered it unusable for covert operations. You know, the agency knew he had Castro penetrators possibly in his group. They weren't going to use his group, and they weren't going to use him during that time, while he might have been giving information back to Castro.
Yeah, well, plus his group seemed a little on the extreme side for, you know, that they couldn't fully trust him.
Yeah, and they were actively trying to deceive the agency, so there's a lot of reasons I think that would show that in 62, 63, his group was in no position to have been used, and he was in no position to trust.
Right, and it wasn't like he was the only show in town. There were other options. So.
And as we know, they used a bunch of them.
Oh yeah.
So that was the fourth document. So on the next document, Viciana, he had prior contacted the agency again in 62 and requested a meeting. This time he again solicited the CIA for funds and wanted some hand grenades. That was one of the specifics. He also claimed his group was independent and that in no circumstance would the agency ever be identified with its activities, which is interesting.
Yeah.
That's seemingly an empty promise because Viciana would later often violate. But, yeah, however, no evidence supports the accusation regarding the assassination of President Kennedy and his claims. So, there's no substantial evidence that the CIA used Viciana for the Castro plots, primarily because they're already ongoing and unknown to him. And this, I think, would infer that the agency had no need to use Viciana because it was engaged in multiple plots with dozens of more experienced and trained forces. You know, Viciana didn't have this ready-made band of assassins to go when the CIA needed them, so why would they use him?
Right.
So, officials noted in this memo that Viciana jealously guarded Alpha 66's finances. So, that moves us on to the fifth document. Oh, that was the fifth document. This moves on to the sixth document, and despite Viciana's confidence and his seeming control over Alpha 66, a few months after his last requested meeting with the agency, the was fractured. Viciana had secretly brought Eloy Gutierrez Manoyo into the group's affairs. Manoyo was a freedom fighter prior allied with the Castro rebels, and it was Manoyo's forces that arrived in Havana preceding Fidel Castro's army. Manoyo's group was joined with Castro's, and Manoyo was not given a position in the new Castro government. And he opposed the communist influences within the Castro government, so he became a revolutionary against it. So Manoyo and a dozen other men escaped from Cuba to Miami. And he later stated during an interview with the New York Times that Manoyo settled in Miami and created an organization to overthrow Mr. Castro, naming it Alpha 66.
So he pretty much stole the name?
He tried to steal Viciana's group from him in history, and this is still online. You can see this report. So if someone doesn't know beyond this report, they might think that Manoyo started Alpha 66.
Right. That's too funny.
Yeah. So he claimed that he, not Antonio Viciana, created it, and primary documents do not agree.
Yeah.
The evidence supports that Antonio Viciana created and led Alpha 66. And so Viciana tried to say that it was Bishop who told him to create Alpha 66.
Of course.
But there's no evidence of that. So. Yeah, so Manoyo actually was a seeming paramilitary leader for Alpha 66. He actually had the army credentials that Viciana did not. And he didn't lead Alpha 66, but he led the second front of Escambray Exegol group, a different group. So Manoyo basically joined some of his followers in Viciana's, and Manoyo soon led a group of men into the Cuban mountains attempting to form a resistance against Castro after this joining, and he was captured and served over 2 decades in a Cuban prison. He eventually was released and became an advocate for diplomacy with Cuba, and he died in 2012. But yeah, that's just an interesting turn to the story that I hadn't heard before.
Right.
That there was the second that eventually would try to take the credit of the group away from Viciana for himself. So this goes on to the next document. In 1962, Manoyo had allied his group of Vicianas, and they subsequently abandoned most of the original Alpha 66 group, the group that everybody talks about being so dangerous. They broke with them when the membership revolted against this alliance between Manoyo and Viciana in 1962. And the revolt stemmed from Manoyo diverting funds and Alpha 66 equipment to launch raids against the Castro government in the name of the Second Front of National, the SFNE, his group, Second Front of Escambray. So, a month before the split was reported to the CIA, Manoyo led paramilitary operation that cost Alpha 66 both of their attack boats, leaving the groups without means to continue their raids against Cuba.
What a shame.
Yeah. But, you know, I mean, so they just lost both of their attack boats.
Was one named the Barber Jam and one name...
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But both of their names were Glug Glug Glug. By 1962. So,
a couple car hoods, mounted on some inner tubes.
Yeah. Yeah, so, their vehicles were gone. Manoyo was captured. His forces were taken down. Most of the original members were mad at Viciana for having broke with them. So, Viciana didn't have a group really to use in Alpha 66. Effectively, it didn't exist in its original form anymore. So why would the agency use him at his weakest point when he was having his most trouble?
Right. I mean, they could have helped him out with some things, but obviously they did not.
Yeah. So then I'm going to jump to some of this is going to jump a little bit ahead, but just to give you some of the updates that the agency was monitoring about Viciana. So the next official document states they basically had a chronology of some of his various actions. Further on Alpha 66, after a New York meeting last night, Viciana and Manoyo walked out on the original group after the split in the organization and retired to Puerto Rico with the corporate name and what money Alpha 66 had in the bank. They are now trying to raise more money. Thus, they have no boats or equipment to carry out further raids at this time, and no great support for their efforts. The rebel faction of Alpha 66, who opposed Manoyo, have formed a new group named Commando L 66, and you might know that name, Rob, the Commando L group, and have attracted most of Alpha 66 former and original members, including their ex-military people and accountants. The Commando L people have some money and are more successful in raising additional funds than the Alpha 66 group. So, fairly clear that if they were going to use anybody, they'd use the rebels of Alpha 66 rather than the original group, which basically consisted of leaders and a few followers and the money in the name.
Right. Now, is this was Felix Rodriguez part of this?
I don't know. I don't think he was in Alpha. Well, I shouldn't say that. I should say I don't know if he was involved in this direct meeting where this happened. But I can look into it more. I mean, if Rodriguez was involved, I think at this point, I don't think that he had any. He wasn't really mentioned in any of the documents, so I don't think that he was directly involved.
Gotcha.
But I would think he went with. They said the military members went with the new people.
Yeah.
So I would imagine he would have went with the rebels since he was military trained.
Right.
Or they would have mentioned him if he left with Manoyo and Viciana.
Right.
So yeah, I think that pretty much just, I didn't mean to belabor the point so much, but just to show everybody exactly what the agency thought of them at that time. So it's unlikely they'd fund an aid group that was so fractured and beyond meetings requested by Viciana and his prior services as saboteur. They had no reason to associate with him in 1963. They did have reason to associate with him before, when his group was functioning and when he seemed to be legitimate and reliable. And later on, when they got more desperate after so many failed attempts against Castro, and they tried to use him for sabotage purposes, that makes sense. But there just isn't a legitimate reason for him and the agency to be in contact in 1963. So, Alpha 66 and most of its members are gone at the end of 62. It was a shadow of its former self, and this too begs the question, why waste the resources on a failed group that had imploded? So the only thing of value Manoyo, and the document concludes, the only thing of value Manoyo was able to take to Alpha 66 was an undetermined amount of ammunition and arms, but no boats, men, or new money.
Shit out of luck.
Basically.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, and that paints a really, really good picture, like you said, of what the agency thought about Alpha 66 and Viciana as a whole, and where he stood with them, and it doesn't lend too much credence to his later stories. So,
yeah, no, I agree. I just think most of the evidence that we have available to us doesn't support the version he was giving people, and he wasn't as important as he tried to claim in the time period he's trying to say this happened.
Right, and people got to remember what kind of dude the Viciana was. I mean, he basically, he was a terrorist, a murderer, but people like Judith Baker just lapped this stuff up, like it's gospel, just because he's saying it.
Exactly, and that's why we can't, it doesn't matter who the eyewitness is, unless other evidence corroborates the story. It's not true. It's their contention.
Well, Judith corroborates it.
Exactly. People without evidence.
Yeah, dang it. Okay.
So, another thing, the 80 document, the next one, I think that it's, unknown to Viciana, the CIA, it was unknown to Viciana that the CIA had received a cable in August 12, 1959 from Havana Station to the director in Washington. And press reports stated that two men who seemingly were aiding opposition forces in Havana were actually Castro agents who penetrated the opposition movement. The result, according to the cable, was island-wide entrapment of opposition elements. Although situations still uncertain and difficult to ascertain to any extent, if any, the compromise of station assets, station employing all security precautions. Now, the two men who were Castro penetration agents, according to the agency in 1959, were Major William Alexander Morgan and Eloy Gutierrez Manoyo. So it's possible that Manoyo intentionally destroyed Alpha 66's chances for continuing sabotage on it.
That's quite possible.
It might have been the plan all along, was to break the group up and then isolate Viciana.
Yeah, and blame him for shit, because, you remember, like Operation Northwoods, they had to blame that on somebody, They needed their still pages too, just in case, certain contingency plans.
Yep.
He'd been a perfect one to pin on.
Exactly. He tried to attract attention to himself. He's always trying to raise money. So to neutralize him, you have somebody infiltrate his group, and the agency knew. That's the really messed up part, is that the agency didn't even tip off to Viciana that Manoyo was feasibly a Castro agent.
Exactly. Yeah. That shows you right there how much they thought about him.
Yeah, so...
and what his value was to them.
Well, yeah, and it would keep them away until Manoyo was captured, we should say, by Castro and held for that long.
I'm surprised he didn't kill him. But
exactly, which is strange.
Yeah.
He was a real threat.
Well, that tells you right there, too. You can say he was in prison for 20 years down there, but was he? I mean,
Well, and then he was released, and he came back here and started talking about how we needed to make a deal with Castro.
Right, not the kind of talk you would think you would hear from somebody who spent 20 years in a Cuban prison.
Yeah. That's up to everybody's judgment for themselves. I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, me too.
That's the real interesting thing, I think, in this story.
Yeah,
is he's a very interesting character. So I don't think they would have. That is just another reason why they wouldn't associate with Alpha 66 with Manoia anywhere near it. And then the next document we look at, it's a CIA chronology on Viciana-related documents, and it ceases in December of 62 and does not resume until May of 66. So I think that also infers that there was no hardcore monitoring of him or Alpha 66 until they actually started to be more of a cohesive group, have funds, weapons, vehicles, and were actually of use to the agency again.
Well, come on, Carmine. If they were talking, if Phillips was talking to Viciana and Oswald, and there'd be records of all this stuff, right?
Well, you would think, yeah. Wouldn't there be?
They would have destroyed them all. They would have destroyed them all, yeah.
Well, and that would be the contention, of course. But if they would have destroyed them all, don't you think they would have also destroyed the ones that showed that they lied to the House Select Committee?
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll finally get them all this year, Carmine. Maybe the truth will finally come out.
That's what they're doing. They're waiting. They want everybody to compile all of the incriminating documents so they can go through and destroy the original.
They're ready for Viciana to die. I mean, come on.
Exactly. So yeah, just another problem. So yeah. So there's that. There's the hole in the agency's actual records of him when they're trying to put a chronology. They usually try to do a good job of putting everything together, as we'll see. They try to get every little nook and cranny they can into their records. And there's no good explanation why it just jumps unless they just didn't associate during that time, beyond all the other factors that we've discussed. So what happened is as the Bishop story starts to get rolling with investigators, people start to be asked by investigators and also by S.D. Breckinridge, who was the CIA's Inspector General at the time. Actually, I think he was Deputy Inspector General when he started, and then he eventually became Inspector General. So 3 CIA employees in the next document do recall knowing a person named Bishop. And one of these people, this includes Director of Intelligence John McCone, the leader of the CIA, Balmes Hidalgo, who is a CIA officer, and an interesting one that I found out I didn't hear often mentioned in this story was DRE case officer Ross Crozier, who Jefferson Morley wrote a lot about.
Right.
Now, Crozier, I found, was using a pseudonym Ron Cross. I found a version of the document as it was in transition between original and being, censored in certain parts. And what I found was it was because it was sent between offices, it had the names still open in certain parts of it. So it said it has like Ross Crozier crossed out with Ron Cross written above it.
Gotcha.
So we can actually affirm that that's who it was. So while McCone and Hidalgo stated that Phillips was not the bishop that they knew another person named Bishop, which is highly possible because of all the other people named Bishop that we're going to go over.
Yeah.
Crozier stated while he was serving at the Miami JM Wave station that he often associated with Phillips's direct assistant, William Kent. Now, Crozier attributes Howard's Hunt use of the name Knight as an association with Phillips' possible use of Bishop. So Crozier thought, for whatever reason, that Bishop was one of the many names used by Phillips. Now, Phillips and Kent were in regular contact by phone, and Phillips would visit him in Miami as well. However, when Kent was interviewed, he did not ever recall the name of the use Knight or Bishop, and he did not support that he ever heard nor said the name Maurice Bishop at JM Wave. So we've got some conflicting stories from even agency internal personnel. But I don't think any of them, substantiates Viciana's claims. It's just part of the investigation. They found this, that, pardon me, they found, John McCone thought that he knew a bishop, and then later on he retracted because it probably turned out to be one of the other bishops. and Hidalgo said it never was Phillips. And then Crozier says that he thought it was Phillips because he associated the name Bishop, but he cites the name Knight, which was actually something that E. Howard Hunt did use. He used the pseudonym Knight. So maybe that's where the confusion came from. It's, not it's a fairly convoluted story, but in there is no primary evidence that supports the Viciana. It just supports that one person thinks that there might have been a chess piece somebody used to represent themselves and made the association with Phillips because he was in contact with his assistant.
Oh, yep, I'm here. Sorry, I was muted again.
That's fine. I'm just glad we can edit.
Yes.
You're like, huh? What did you just...
Well, yeah. Huh? Let me mark this. 47 minutes, 5 seconds in. Okay. All right, we're good.
So I think it's interesting. It definitely adds to making the story more convoluted as these versions come out.
Of course. Yeah, that's, like I said before, when we start talking about bishops, here we go.
Yeah, everybody knows at least some version of a bishop, apparently.
Yeah.
So yeah, we move on from that to what, you and I have discussed a couple of times, is that beyond the claims of Antonio Viciana, and this would be the 10th document, or the 11th document, there's no substantial evidence to support his allegation that David Atlee Phillips was bishop. Among the problems with his bishop allegation is that Viciana has no exact date for the meeting.
Yep.
The month of the meetings changed over time.
Yep.
Viciana has offered both August and September in different versions. In this document, you can see one of those versions of 63 in different accounts. And the problem is Oswald is still in New Orleans during August, and David Atlee Phillips was serving in the CIA's Mexico City station in August.
Yeah.
And not in Dallas during September of 63.
Yes,
when Oswald was likely on his way to Mexico City.
So there's no proof, no travel vouchers or anything for Phillips?
No.
Of him going to Dallas from Mexico. Okay.
Yeah. Well, he's not supposed to be. He has an office in Mexico City Station where he's supposed to be running. It's not just Mexico City he was running. He was foreign counterintelligence for the station's foreign counterintelligence for the whole area. So basically all of Mexico, all the stuff that has to do with Cuba and Puerto Rico and Haiti. And he's associated with JM Wave, too. I'm thinking that would have kept him fairly busy.
Oh, of course. Yeah, he might have to travel back to the States at some point, for work or for meetings.
He went to Washington. They would have him going to Washington, too.
Yeah, but he would have had to stop probably somewhere like Dallas, to catch another flight. Because we know back then, that, there was no plane that could travel that far, from D.C. to Mexico City, or even Rome to Mexico City, like some people want to assert. But I'll leave that alone for now.
So and then that's ultimately another issue we come into, is that there are no travel vouchers. And Viciana tries to claim, at the very end of our conversation, I already sent it to you, but I can give them the link to the 40 plus more sources that they can consult on their own too. The listener can, check out all the evidence that I found. And that's a problem, is that Viciana tried to claim that he met with Bishop over 100 times, and he couldn't have, not if it's Phillips, because Phillips was elsewhere. He was busy in Mexico City Station, he was in the Dominican Republic, he was all over, but he wasn't in Dallas in 63.
Right, that can be established.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Viciana can't establish it, is the problem too. He's never given, there is no tangible evidence beyond what he claims.
And what the hell was he doing in Dallas?
Yeah, that is another question. Why would you go to Dallas when you've been operating usually in, lower parts of the Western Hemisphere?
Yeah. Okay.
So, well, because it was easy. That's why. Because it makes for a good story.
Right. That's why Bishop wanted to meet, I guess.
The most obvious place where the crime was going to. I never get that either. When people try to set stuff like secret meetings near the crime scene.
Yeah, especially in public, in a hotel or wherever it was, and.
Yeah. So Both men could not have been where Viciana claims when Viciana claims, despite which version you believe.
Right.
Whether it was September or August.
Now,
and I even found a few things that show that he was in Mexico City in October, too, and November.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, Carmine, and I don't, it just popped in my mind. I want to say there was somebody else that corroborated this so-called meeting, and I can't remember who it was, whether it was Ron Lewis in his book Flashback or not. I'm going to have to go back and look.
That would be pretty interesting, considering Viciana said there was only him, Phillips, and Oswald.
Right. I have to go back and look. There's something somewhere in my brain throwing up a smoke signal somewhere. I'll have to go back and look.
I was going to say, I think now we might come to perhaps the most important problem with Viciana's story. And that's that David Atlee Phillips was not the only person he accused of being Maurice Bishop. On the 12th document, Antonio Viciana confirmed to investigators that David Atlee Phillips was not Maurice Bishop after meeting him in person and later in testimony as well. Viciana then accused the CIA's Dallas Domestic Contact Division officer, James Walton Moore, of being the elusive Maurice Bishop.
Okay.
Yeah. The next document states, for the past several weeks, a story has been making the rounds in Dallas, and it's been reported in the press that one Maurice Bishop met with Lee Harvey Oswald and an unidentified Cuban in the Dallas DCD office 1 month or so before President John F. Kennedy's assassination. This story alleges that Maurice Bishop is really J. Walton Moore of the DCD office, who used this alias and offered Oswald money to assassinate President Kennedy. Antonio Viciana has testified recently before a House committee, presumably the House Select Committee on Assassinations, on the alleged Maurice Bishop involvement in the Kennedy assassination. According to Jack Anderson's column, Viciana is stated to be the unidentified Cuban present at the alleged meeting with Oswald and Bishop in Dallas of 1963.
Oh, well, Jack Anderson said it. I mean, shit. Oh.
Yeah.
I love how the same shit keeps popping up and up again. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So, this is a huge problem. This, in my opinion, sinks this whole story.
Yep.
As soon as you stop accusing consistently one person and then begin to accuse somebody else, who, if you look at the picture, I have pictures of him on TPOC, of J. Walton Moore. If you go to the primary evidence collections at TPOC.com, J. Walton Moore, and he does kind of look like the drawing too.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people do.
Yeah, it's very general.
Yeah. I mean, it's distinctive in a way, but it could be any slender older man. You know,
it's a slender older CIA guy.
It's not bald. No.
So,
yeah.
So this, I think, is probably the straw that breaks the camel's back as far as this story goes. So this causes various reporters, as a result of these new claims about Moore instead of Phillips, that included one document talks about Bill O'Reilly tried to pursue obtaining photographs and interviews with J. Walton Moore.
Oh, with Walton, okay.
Yeah, because he thought that was the new scoop. And yeah,
I remember he was chasing Viciana right before he got shot in the head.
Yep. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
It might have been right after Viciana had been shot in the head. I think he was chasing when Viciana was in a white VW Beetle.
Yeah, he was trying to get in the car with a microphone.
Yeah. Back before he sold his soul to Rupert Murdoch.
Yep. So this, I think, proves Viciana drastically altered his story. You know, he himself discounts Phillips in the legal record in his testimony. He says it wasn't Phillips that was Bishop. And he needed somebody else to be Bishop, apparently. Phillips also testified that he never used the name Bishop. Viciana and the press then pursue Moore, and that chase offers no suspect of nefarious reputation, so in time, what's he do? He reverses back to Phillips.
Of course. How convenient.
Yeah. So, some of the other notable issues, this will be in the 13th document. A few of the other notable issues, I'd say, are the amount of time Viciana claims, that I brought up earlier, that Viciana claims to have met Bishop over 100 times. And the problem is, based on some of the documents we've discussed, and in some that are going to be in the essays that's going to be linked to this, is that there's no extensive amount of documents that support him. In the ones that have been thus far reviewed, J. Walton Moore is located in Dallas consistently, except for a year of service at CIA headquarters. So if Moore was Bishop, he had to make all those meetings that Phillips couldn't make, and he can't because he's either in Washington or Dallas all the time.
Yeah. Yep, or meeting with the man shield.
Mm-hmm. Which is a lot more likely. When I first came into this, I was like, wow, Moore is a possibility. Moore could actually be, but then I saw all the problems with that.
Yeah, gotta line the timelines up.
Yeah. So now we have, so Moore can't be in the foreign locations that Viciana alleged. Phillips can't be in the foreign locations that Viciana alleged. And while Moore is in Dallas during 1963, he was not Viciana, which would actually support, if he would have consistently went with Moore, that would actually support Viciana's timeline, but he wasn't his first choice. And now Viciana has reversed back from Moore to the more well-known David Atlee Phillips.
Well, not back to David Atlee Phillips, but just at the time, somebody different. It wasn't J. Walton Moore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they didn't say publicly it was Bishop until a couple years ago.
Oh yeah, no. I know publicly he didn't say that it was Bishop, but
right.
In the questioning during the House Select Committee, he said it wasn't Phillips.
Right.
So that's what I mean. It would that it was kicked around that it could be Phillips, so he went to go investigate to see if it was, and then he said it wasn't him, and then he said it was J. Walton Moore, and then he said it wasn't J. Walton Moore, it was Phillips again.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose, yeah, you're right. The first time he confirmed it utterly wasn't until 2013. He alluded to it back before.
Right.
And then, once that didn't work, he went with Moore, and then that didn't work, so.
Right.
Yeah, there's problems. Some serious problems. So another problem is that Viciana claims Bishop paid him $253,000. Remember, this is a guy they gave $100 a month to for refugee.
Right.
Okay. So that's saying that they gave him over $250,000 for his past services. Now, these supposed services being multiple failed plots.
Right.
Destroying the original Office 66 by 1962. And some of the later sabotage services he offered in the late 60s. Now, in my opinion, this amount is highly questionable. It exceeds what some entire exile groups received yearly for successful operations. It's very improbable that the agency would pay someone of peripheral use in minor operations so much. And there, of course, is no proof that such a payment occurred based on the Select Committee investigators. That was more money than they offered the mafia chiefs to kill Castro.
Well,
That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money.
Yeah. That's more than whoever killed Kennedy probably got.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a serious amount of money, and I can't imagine that they would, the agency couldn't afford to do that, especially for somebody who had such questionable ties and members like Manoyo of his organization.
Well, they could if they were using black budget type stuff, but
yeah,
they would have to sell a lot of drugs.
Nice. Yeah, that would have taken. I'm just thinking at the time. I'm sure their budget was huge, but they've got dozens of other Castro plots going on. I should say they had all the Castro plots going on, and then they have dozens of other groups they're funding. So, what would constitute him so worthy to receive so much money?
Yeah.
When all we see is failures and minor use.
Yeah, you don't see guys like Frank Sturgis even getting that much money, and look what he did.
Yeah. Yeah, and he was basically a murderer on hire to some of the Castro groups and, agency-allied military fringe.
Yeah, I mean, did he take out Che Guevara? Or
no, supposedly that was the guy you mentioned earlier. I can't remember.
Felix Rodriguez.
Yeah, Rodriguez supposedly has Guevara's Rolex.
Yeah, I just remember somebody said they chopped his head off and kicked it like a soccer ball. I thought that was Sturgeon. I don't know. I could be wrong. Yeah.
Well, something I saw, because I really, for a long time, I mean, I understood that he was a mercenary, but he made so many ridiculous claims that I've kind of set Sturgis off to the side, but he still was a killer. I mean, he went down there and helped execute, Castro people in the early days.
He was a legitimate badass. I mean,
there were some truth. Unfortunately, when he starts to get into, like Viciana, there's some truth to it.
Right.
Once you start really looking at the specifics, there's some problems. So yeah, we've just got to, that huge amount of money is just another reason why this is improbable, this whole story. The agency wasn't going to make a payout. It would have been easier to kill him.
Well, yeah.
Or arrest him, or discredit him.
Or kill him.
Yeah.
Put a bullet in his brain and not worry about paying him.
Yeah.
So, unless he has some real dirt on him, I mean, which I'm sure he didn't.
Yeah, no, he wasn't in any position to. So.
No.
So, additionally, I think that it's also worth considering that there were over a dozen agency employees and informants that had the surname Bishop. And that's just the ones I found. There could have even been more, in other documents and in other collections. So, Agency Inspector General S.D. Breckenridge conducted a full review of the agency files and put together a photographic album of every person with the name Bishop that he could locate. One of these persons was named Maurice Bishop. However, he was an elderly professor at Cornell University and just a source of foreign intelligence.
Right, just an asset.
Yeah. No one of importance that would have met with Oswald.
Right. Now, I mean, it could have been somebody using a name that was familiar with them, that was associated with the CIA. I mean, that would be a smart thing to do. Mm-hmm. I mean, not use your real name, but,
Yeah, you use something that is easily mistaken for somebody else's name.
Right.
Or even if they were an outside party that had knowledge of the CIA's tactics like that, and they were doing it so they could implicate the CIA and not implicate themselves.
Yeah, and as we know, common aliases were used by various agents, in multiplicity for certain things, so...
So we have... we have that Bishop. We actually had the name, the current name anyway.
Yes. The real one.
Exactly. So I'd say, in summary, Viciana has accused multiple people of being Maurice, Jim, or John Bishop, a man he asserted meeting in 1960 or 1961, whom he claimed to have instructed him to form Alpha 66, though none of his friends or associates were ever observed such a person. And due to political misjudgments and failed operations, Viciana's group implodes before 1963. The CIA knows of his problems and his desperation to save his group, and does not aid him, but observe him. And then Viciana, over a decade later, offers his claims to the Schweiker Committee, and these diverge from the later allegations in the press, and they further evolve during the interviews with the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Finally, Viciana reverses back to his prior claims in a letter that is not subject to legal standards of perjury.
I wonder what his motivation was for all this crap. You know what I mean? Like, well, what he was trying to do. I just don't get it.
Well, I think... I don't think now. I mean, it probably has developed over time. Now it could be attention. It could be wants to leave an infamous name for himself, so he's remembered. But at the time, beyond attention and trying to seek, funding. That's the only reason. Just to make himself interesting, I guess, so that he could. Maybe he thought that he would keep his, Alpha 66 on people's lips, and that he would get more funding from people if he kept himself in the public eye.
Or possible blackmail that the CIA would just pay him off to shut his mouth, or...
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, could be another thing.
because he probably knew that, maybe not everybody would know exactly what everybody was doing in the CIA, 15 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that a lot of people do depend on that have unfortunately come to the modern age where things are a lot more achievable as far as finding that document you're looking for.
Right.
Yeah, so at the time he was basically counting on the ignorance of the public and that we didn't have access to anything. Because, I mean, we've both seen the Alpha 66 story. I'm sure a lot of the listeners have seen it too, where people try to say that Alpha 66 is the key to the JFK case. Like, some people try to say everything is the key.
Exactly. This one just, it's lacking a whole lot of substance.
Yeah.
But there's people, there's people desperate enough to, like even Johnny Eugenio has his hat on this guy,
Yeah, I'm not saying that, I can understand why people want to believe it, but we also have to, if we want to come to that final answer, or at least some of the big answers in the JFK case, we're going to have to set aside the stuff that doesn't have evidence.
Yeah, I mean,
no matter how much people like it.
It vindicates their so-called, CIA primacy in the case, that. Well, they think it vindicates it. It just adds another element of vindication to their version of events where the CIA and Allen Dulles and everybody else from top down was involved in the Kennedy assassination,
Which is highly improbable.
Right.
I'm sorry to say to anybody who believes that. It's highly improbable that the CIA is responsible because, one, all the people that people try to include in these, large CIA plots, most of them had opposing agendas. They weren't all just, the go-do-it lackey that some people might think that everyone was to Allen Dulles. Some people, and Allen Dulles wasn't in charge at the time. So, if anything, if Dulles were involved, it would have been an extra CIA operation by former CIA members. Not necessarily by the current. People under McCone weren't going to just do whatever Dulles said because he was Allen Dulles.
Right.
They might have and that's the problem too, is the bigger the plot, the harder it is to get away with it, because somebody's going to talk, or somebody, as Larry Hancock's book said, someone would have talked. And, there was no reason to have any allegiance to these people who were outside of the CIA or outside of the government at that time. Now, to me, it would make a lot more sense that a small group of those sorts of people might get together and do something, but not the whole CIA.
Right. Yeah, I mean, just like several other assertions out there, this, it just can't be proven.
Yeah, and therefore, it's not worth wasting our time.
Nope, must be dismissed.
Yeah, he didn't, and that's what the House Select Committee themselves did. When they went over, even with less evidence than we have today, they went over it, and they eventually decided that, despite all of the hard work that Fonzie put in, Viciana didn't give him the things he needed to get the work done. He didn't give him a specific time. He didn't give him a specific place. That changed in some of the versions. He didn't give him specific interactions that happened. He tried to say the over 100 meetings. He tried to say the 253, I think it was, $53,000 payment. All this stuff, and he couldn't prove any of it.
Yeah, that's the problem. And this is not some cursory, accusation.
I didn't just look at a few pieces of paper and decide this. This is all of the evidence we've seen today. It's at least another 12 or 13 references, and then you add that to the final link that's going to be on this. And that's to my essay, and that has 53 primary documents to go with on its own.
Well, yeah, I mean, and his accusation is not to be taken lightly either. It's not like some throwaway comment that really doesn't mean much, because if he's asserting that Lee Harvey Oswald had ties to David Atlee Phillips and the CIA, which, if true, that blows the whole case wide open, and there you go. But, there's one gigantic problem. You can't prove it.
Yeah. And the things we can prove are against his contentions. What we can show, where Phillips was, where Oswald was, that doesn't work. We can show that he used multiple names, and we can show all of the details that we've already discussed with the story evolving and changing. even different people. He couldn't even pick one person to be bishop.
Right, which is another problem. Yeah, that's the giveaway. I mean, other than the fact that the rest of his story is just implausible as hell and not backed up by anything. But yeah, when your story starts changing and you can't settle on one version of events, then chances are you're lying.
Yeah, and not to say that there aren't elements. Like I think I say in the essay that I don't doubt his hatred for Castro. I don't doubt that he wanted to kill him. I don't doubt that he was in charge of a group at one point. I don't doubt that he associated with the CIA. There's some truth, but the big points, the important points, especially to those of us that are seeking more information and greater clarity in the Kennedy case, are flawed or just outright deception. They're wrong. He can say that it was because of the shot in the head that the evolutions happened at that point and after. But that was already after some evolutions had happened, and somebody else was accused.
Exactly.
It doesn't get any better.
No.
The more evidence you look at, it just seems to get worse.
Exactly.
And I will never, because I don't think any of us should ever, for doing our due diligence and getting the evidence, apologize. But I am sorry that people were deceived. I am sorry that the story has existed for so long and been taken up by so many people who are respected. But it's just a story.
Yep.
And I'm more than willing, if people want to look at all the evidence, if there's something in there that's contradictory, or if they have some sort of evidence that Viciana has decided not to share that they've found. But until, and I don't even want to say until, because I know it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
There's no way he's going to be able to go through and fix all of these problems with some magical, new evidence.
No. Like I said, not unless some smoking gun comes out next October.
Yeah, if there's a photograph that can be legitimized of Phillips and Viciana and Lee Harvey Oswald, toasting glasses in a restaurant to the assassination. Sorry to say, there's something that even puts them in the same country at the same time.
Yeah, and that's the problem. And I wanted to ask you too, did you get a chance to read Matthew Shavely's article on David Atlee Phillips?
Yeah, the Melton thing, I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, I put that up on NEMG too.
Okay, good.
Exactly.
Yeah,
There's some more problems. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you can find that over at NEMG.com. Is it NEMG.com?
NEAMG.
Let's try that again.
NEAMG.com.
NEAMG.com. Yeah, and I'd encourage everybody to go check it out, along with Carmine's essay on what we just talked about here today, for sure.
And that's on TPAAK.com, TPAAK.com.
Yes, and of course, we'll link everything up over at TLGpodcast.com, and also links will be there for all the documents that we talked about here today. Did we get them all, Carmine?
I do believe that was all of them. And I'm glad that we got a chance to do this, and I know that some people are going to support us, which I'm very thankful for, and some people are going to be very opposed because nobody likes change.
I know.
Important, but it's important that we do leave our minds open enough to, when new evidence comes, we have to change our ideas. Some things, we're never going to get to that one last answer on the table if we don't start studying some of the things aside that are probably not associated with the answer.
Yep. I mean, it's called honest research, people. And when you're presented with something that doesn't fit with your beliefs, you must be able to look objectively at what the and what the documents tell us, and not just what a storyteller wants to tell us. And you just got to be willing to stick to the facts. Just the facts, ma'am. And that's all we can do. Until some of this stuff can be proven, you can't factor it into the mix. And that's what we do here. This is when myths come to die, and we just killed one. Bye-bye, Maurice Bishop.
Exactly. Let's put bishops back where they belong, in chess.
That's right. And in churches.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Carmine. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show again, my friend, and first time in 2017.
Yeah, no, it's great to be back, Rob. Thanks for having me, and thanks for we do a lot of subjects that other people might not want to touch that might be unpopular, but I think they definitely need to be discussed.
Oh, for sure. We got to keep everybody in check, man. You know how we do. All right, well, yeah, man. Thank you for coming on the show again, and like I said, everybody. You can find all this stuff that we talk about, all links to the documents we talked about here today over on tlgpodcast.com and on Facebook at the Lone Gunman Podcast page. I'll put them there as well for everybody to check out. And that's it for this week. Carmine, thank you, sir. I'll talk to you soon. And that's it, people. This sumbitch is in the can, beamed up the satellite down directly to your ears. This is your boy. Peace.